Why the hell is my daughter speaking Korean? Brandon Westfield's voice cracked like thunder through the vaulted ceilings of the Westfield estate. The sheer force of his words echoed off the marble floors, startling even the family dog curled beneath the piano bench. He stood frozen in the doorway, one hand still gripping the sleek leather briefcase he hadn't yet set down. Across the room, sitting cross-legged on the rug beneath the grand piano, was a woman in a faded blue apron. Her name was Maria Delgado. And beside her, his daughter Ellie, 6 years old, diagnosed with autism at 4, clinically mute since his wife passed away. And now she was murmuring something soft, rhythmic, precise. "Annyeonghayo," the little girl said again, her tone light as if savoring the sound. Brandon's face flushed. "What the—" He dropped the briefcase, the contents spilling across the stone floor. "What is going on here?" Maria didn't flinch. She gently placed the children's picture book back on the floor, stood up slowly, and adjusted the apron around her waist. "I can explain, Mr. Westfield," she said calmly. "You'd better," he snapped, walking quickly across the room, stepping over stuffed animals and alphabet tiles. He stopped just a foot from her. "You were hired to clean the East Wing, not tutor my daughter in, whatever that was." "It was Korean," Maria said. "She asked me how to say hello." Brandon glanced down at Ellie. The girl looked up at him with wide eyes, calm, unbothered, and somehow clearer than he'd seen in years. "That's not possible," he said, his voice cracking. "She hasn't spoken in 2 years. Not a word, not to anyone." "She hasn't spoken," Maria corrected gently, "but she listens." "She always has." He exhaled harshly, gesturing toward the door. "Get out of this room now and stay away from her." Ellie flinched at the tone. Maria nodded without protest. But before she turned, she said one last thing, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes, sir, children don't need fixing. They just need to be heard in the language they understand." The next morning, Maria was reassigned to the basement level, cleaning the storage closets, scrubbing concrete, out of sight. And Ellie Brandon doubled her therapy sessions and left strict instructions with the house staff. No interaction with Maria. 0, not even eye contact. But Ellie wasn't the same. She wandered more, sat silently near the stairs, whispered strange words into her pillow. Spanish, he thought, maybe French. Brandon tried to dismiss it, but at 2 a.m. that night, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the baby monitor. "Mercy, Papa," Ellie had said softly as she turned over in her sleep. It was the first time she'd called him Papa in over 700 days, and it wasn't in English. 3 days later, Dr. Ezra Lin came to the house for a routine checkup. Brandon pulled him aside. "I need you to evaluate something," he said. He showed the doctor a short video taken from the security feed in the piano room. In it, Ellie was sitting with Maria, repeating Korean syllables and tracing letters in the air. When the clip ended, Brandon turned to the physician. "Tell me that's a trick. Tell me it's mimicry or nonsense sounds." Dr. Lin was quiet for a long time. "That's not mimicry," he said at last. "That's comprehension, structured phonemes, intentional repetition." Brandon swallowed. "But how? Language doesn't just come out of nowhere." Dr. Lin said, frowning, "It has to be introduced, modeled, encouraged." Brandon rubbed his jaw. "She hasn't responded to anyone. Not even specialists. Maybe the problem, Lynn said gently, isn't Ellie's condition, but how we've been speaking to her. He paused. Tell me more about Maria. Brandon didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because for the first time, he realized he didn't know anything about her at all. The scent of bleach lingered in the narrow basement hallway. Maria Delgado crouched beside a dusty shelving unit, scrubbing at a decades-old rust stain that refused to budge from the cement floor. The silence down there wasn't peaceful. It was strategic, purposeful, designed to make her disappear. And that's exactly what Brandon Westfield had intended. 3 days had passed since she'd been removed from Ellie's vicinity. 3 days of assigned silence. 3 days since the girl had said, "Mercy, Papa," in her sleep, words Maria had carefully planted, one sound at a time, hidden between casual hums and whispered syllables as she dusted bookshelves or mopped the nursery floor. Now Maria was invisible again until she heard footsteps. Tiny, hesitant, then the sound of a familiar voice, barely above a breath. Maria. She turned slowly. Ellie stood in the doorway at the top of the basement stairs, hugging a stuffed panda to her chest. The girl tilted her head, eyes searching. Maria, she whispered, this time in Spanish. Libro book. Maria's heart jumped. She rose from the floor, walked to the foot of the stairs, and crouched down. You want the book, mija? Ellie nodded. Gato, cat, chat. Maria's throat tightened. Ellie remembered. She hadn't just listened, she'd retained. Maria reached into a cleaning supply box and carefully pulled out a children's book she had accidentally left there. Animal Words Around the World. Colorful drawings, each labeled in 6 languages. Don't tell anyone, Maria said softly, smiling as she handed it up. Ellie took it, turned to go, and paused. Then, as though it took every ounce of bravery, she turned back, looked Maria in the eye, and whispered, "Gracias." Then disappeared up the stairs like a whisper in reverse. That night, Maria sat alone in the dim laundry room, listening to the machine's hum and turning a pen in her hand. On a notepad, she began outlining something she hadn't touched in years. Selective mutism and multilingual triggers, an adaptive approach. She stopped, stared at the page, and wrote a single name in the margin. Ellie. Then she circled it. Upstairs, Brandon sat at the kitchen island with a glass of bourbon, reviewing emails. He wasn't supposed to be home. He'd canceled a business trip to Miami last minute. He didn't even know why. Something about that night in the piano room had stuck under his skin. He thought of Ellie's voice, clear, musical, foreign. She hadn't called him daddy in years. She hadn't called him anything. And then she did, but not in English. Not for him. For Maria. He scrolled through his phone contacts and found Dr. Ezra Lynn's number. Voice message begins. Ezra, I need to talk. There's more going on than I thought about Maria and Ellie. I'm not sure I've been fair. Call me back. End message. The next morning, Maria received a text from an unknown number. I saw what happened. Meet me in the garden shed at 10 a.m. Lynn. Maria kept her head down until then. At precisely 10 o'clock, she slipped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. Dr. Lynn was already waiting, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I looked you up, he said without preamble. You're not a maid. Maria froze. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and handed it to her. Dr. Maria Delgado, NYU Faculty Directory, Department of Applied Linguistics. Specialty, Multilingualism and Neurodivergent Cognition. Maria didn't speak. I also read your article, he added, the one from the Journal of Cognitive Development, about how language stimulates dormant neural pathways in kids with selective mutism. Maria exhaled slowly. I wrote that 5 years ago, before my mother got sick, before I had to take any job that paid in cash and didn't ask for a resume. Dr. Lin nodded, eyes steady. And Ellie? Maria glanced away. She's not mute, Dr. Lin. She's terrified. She's waiting. And the language she's waiting for isn't always English. Dr. Lin ran a hand through his hair. If I back you, if I give you medical cover and observational clearance, would you help her fully? Maria's voice was quiet but firm. That's why I'm still here. Unbeknownst to both of them, Olivia, the head housekeeper, watched from a side window. Her eyes narrowed. She opened the Notes app on her phone, typed, "She's not who she says she is." Just overheard a private meeting. We'll explain later, and hit send to Victoria Belmont, socialite, gossip columnist, longtime friend of the Westfields. The spark had been lit, and the house was dry with secrets. By Monday morning, the Westfield estate no longer hummed with quiet luxury. It pulsed with suspicion. The story broke early, 6:03 a.m., to be exact. A confidential tip had landed in the inbox of the Fairfield Whisper, a high society gossip blog read by every brunch group between Greenwich and Manhattan. The headline was impossible to miss. Is Westfield's Maid a fraud? A doctor running experiments on his autistic daughter? By 8 a.m., Brandon's phone was flooded with texts. Is this true? Who is she really? Control the narrative now or you'll lose it. He didn't reply. He didn't even look up from his coffee. Across the table, Ellie sat with her cereal, quietly pointing to the back of the milk carton. "Le," she said softly. Brandon blinked. "Le," she repeated, tapping the French word. Then again, milk. His spoon froze midair. "You just," Ellie turned to him with that same unreadable calm she'd inherited from her mother. "Also, leche," she added, "and milch." For languages, one sentence. Brandon pushed the cereal aside and stared at her like she had just come back from the dead, because in a way, she had. By mid-morning, the house buzzed with tension. Maria scrubbed the marble sink in the guest bath while Olivia lingered in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes smug. She cleared her throat loudly. "Heard you're quite the scholar," she said, dripping sarcasm. "Dr. Delgado, was it?" Maria kept her back turned. "I never used that name here." "Well, someone did," Olivia said, pulling her phone from her apron pocket and tapping it like a weapon. "And it's spreading like wildfire." "I'm not hiding," Maria said without turning. "I'm working like I've done every day since I got here." Olivia scoffed. "Let's see how long that lasts." By noon, Brandon had made up his mind. He called Maria into the study. She stepped in slowly, hands folded, face composed. Brandon didn't look up at first. He simply turned his laptop toward her. On the screen, her faculty profile from NYU, complete with published research and conference photos. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Maria inhaled deeply. "Because you weren't asking." Brandon leaned back. "You let me believe you were a maid." "I am a maid," she said simply. "I'm also a linguist, a researcher, a daughter, a woman who needed a job more than she needed recognition." Brandon stared at her. "You could have lied." "I didn't. I just didn't offer more than you wanted to see." That silenced him. Maria's voice softened. "I didn't approach Ellie. She approached me. I spoke just softly enough for her to feel safe. And she responded, not because I pushed her, but because I listened." Brandon rubbed his temple. "This house, this family, we don't do well with noise." "She isn't noise," Maria said. "She's music. You just haven't heard the melody yet." Before he could answer, a voice interrupted from the hallway. "Lana." Ellie's voice rang out, clear, bright, musical. Brandon stood abruptly. Ellie barreled into the study with a book clutched in both hands. She stopped in front of Maria, breathing quickly. "Can you read it with me?" Maria knelt, her voice tender. "Of course." Ellie opened the book. Cat, chat, gato, cat's, meow. Brandon's throat tightened. He looked at his daughter, the small, fragile child whose world had been locked away for years, and saw something he hadn't seen since before his wife died. Joy. Pure, unfiltered joy. That night, Brandon sat in the kitchen alone, reviewing the article again. The public was demanding a statement. The board of his tech company wanted clarity. His lawyer said, "Distance yourself. Fire her. Make it clean." But then Ellie walked in. She wore her mother's old cardigan, sleeves dragging past her wrists. She climbed into the chair across from him, her expression serious. "Papa," she said. "Are you mad?" He looked up, startled. "At you?" "Never." "At Maria?" He hesitated. "I don't know yet." Ellie placed the book on the table. "She told me I wasn't broken. Just quiet." Brandon felt something fracture inside his chest. "She helped me talk," Ellie continued, tracing a finger across the cover. "Not just with words, with me." Brandon reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You think she should stay?" Ellie nodded. "She sees me like Mom used to." Silence fell between them. Then Brandon stood up, walked to the window, and made a single call. "Ezra," he said into the phone. "I'm not firing her. I'm giving her a lab, and I want you to supervise it quietly, until I can figure out what the hell to do with the rest of this world." Brandon Westfield's private study had never hosted a whiteboard before. Now it had 3. By Friday afternoon, his sleek mahogany walls were lined with sketches, multilingual learning flowcharts, sticky notes, and video screens. Ezra Lynn stood in front of one, tapping a marker against his palm, while Maria Delgado, in a navy blue cardigan instead of her apron, adjusted a camera lens pointed toward the playroom. Ellie sat inside, headphones on, whispering phonetic blends in German. "She initiated in 6 languages this week," Maria said softly. "German, Spanish, Korean, French, Hebrew, and English." She's code switching seamlessly. Brandon stood with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed. And you're still sure this isn't savant behavior? Maria turned to him. No. This is structured learning, responsive growth, and more importantly, it's joyful. Brandon glanced at his daughter through the glass. She was laughing at something on the screen, then repeating the word Catsy with glee. He swallowed. She hasn't laughed like that in 4 years. That weekend, Dr. Lin filed a preliminary observational report under a pseudonym, Project Bridge. Maria wrote a corresponding entry on neuroplasticity and language triggers in high-sensitivity children. Both documents were encrypted. Both were brilliant, and both somehow were leaked. By Sunday morning, the Fairfield whisper struck again. The Westfield child is part of a secret experiment, and her father approves. The article accused Brandon of enabling an unlicensed, undocumented linguist to conduct behavioral manipulation on a vulnerable child. Photos followed, grainy images of Maria in the playroom holding flashcards with the caption, "Doctor or dangerous?" Brandon's phone lit up in waves. His board, his lawyer, a senator's wife whose child went to the same elite preschool Ellie had dropped out of all with the same warning. End it, or you lose everything. Inside the estate, Maria sat on the edge of the reading nook while Ellie flipped through her animal word book, oblivious to the world outside. Do you know what a wolf says in Russian? Maria asked. Ellie shook her head, eyes eager. Vog, Maria said. And they howl like this. She howled softly, making Ellie giggle uncontrollably. The girl howled back. Oh, whoa! The two of them laughed together like sisters sharing a secret. But as the laughter faded, Maria's smile dimmed. She could feel it, the storm pressing against the windows. That evening, Brandon burst into the study. He was still in his golf jacket, but the tension in his jaw said he hadn't played a single hole. Maria, he said, closing the door behind him. We've got a problem. She stood. I read the article. There's more. Olivia's been talking. She told someone that you were recording Ellie without parental consent. Maria flinched. I never recorded without informing Dr. Lin. Every file was encrypted. Doesn't matter. They're spinning it. Brandon ran a hand through his hair. Half the board thinks you're a hero. The other half wants you off the property by tomorrow morning. Maria folded her arms. And you? Brandon looked exhausted. I don't care about the board. Then what do you care about, Mr. Westfield? Brandon's voice softened. My daughter. And what happens if you're gone? There was a long pause. Then Maria said, so what's the plan? The plan was riskier than either of them admitted out loud. Dr. Lin moved his equipment to the guest house, setting up a small lab hidden behind blackout curtains. Maria continued working during cleaning hours but spent afternoons in the nursery, rotating language modules with Ellie, using nothing but play, music, and trust. But the threat grew louder. Bloggers accused Maria of exploiting the Westfields for a second chance at fame. Anonymous emails flooded Brandon's investor inbox. A parent at the country club confronted him in the parking lot. Is this what you're teaching your daughter? That rules don't apply if someone speaks nicely? Brandon didn't answer because Ellie had started calling him Daddy again, in English, every night. On the 5th day, Maria woke to a sealed envelope slipped under her guest room door. Return to form, Notice of Investigation, Connecticut Family Oversight Commission. At the bottom, anonymous source alleges psychological interference with a minor. Her chest tightened. But that same morning, Ellie ran up behind her in the hallway, threw her arms around Maria's waist, and whispered in perfectly pronounced Italian, "Non smettera, don't stop teaching me." Later that evening, Brandon sat on the porch with Dr. Lynn. The sky was the color of tarnished copper, the air thick with coming rain. "She's changed," Brandon said. "You mean Maria?" Brandon shook his head. "Ellie." Dr. Lynn smiled. "Sometimes change doesn't come through force. It comes when someone sees what's already there." Brandon exhaled slowly. "They're trying to burn everything down." Lynn looked at him. "Then we build something stronger." And beneath the estate, in a quiet backroom lit by soft lamps and the murmur of lullabies in multiple tongues, Maria scribbled the first words of a new proposal. "The Language of the Heart, a multilingual approach to healing in children with trauma-linked mutism." She signed it, Dr. M. Delgado. For the first time in years, the title didn't feel like an apology. It felt like a promise from BUP Stories. The official letter arrived at 9:13 a.m. hand-delivered in a cream-colored envelope sealed with a state insignia. Brandon read it twice before setting it down, hands trembling. Pursuant to the Connecticut Family Oversight Commission's emergency jurisdiction, the child, Ellie Westfield, will be temporarily removed from all non-parental influence pending full investigation. Effective immediately. At that moment, sunlight poured through the kitchen window like nothing was wrong, but everything was. Ellie sat cross-legged on the playroom carpet, murmuring names of birds in Korean, French, and Arabic, gently tracing them with finger paint on a wide canvas sheet. Maria sat nearby, not instructing, just listening. They had developed a rhythm, one that no program or textbook could replicate, a language of presence, of safety. Then the door opened with force. 2 plainclothes officers stepped in, followed by a stern woman in a gray skirt suit. Behind her, Brandon. "Miss Delgado," the woman said without greeting. "Please step away from the child." Ellie froze. Maria stood calmly but firmly. "She's not in danger." "This isn't negotiable," the woman snapped. "We have cause in jurisdiction." Brandon stepped forward, voice strained. "There's no legal basis. Mr. Westfield, you may retain counsel, but the Commission has acted under parental endangerment guidelines." At that, Maria's expression shifted. For the first time in weeks, she looked afraid, not for herself, for Ellie. The girl stood up slowly, the paint still wet on her fingertips. "Papa?" she asked. Brandon went to her, dropped to his knees, and held her shoulders. "Sweetheart, you're okay. You're safe. Just listen." But she didn't. Her eyes darted to Maria. "Don't let them take her," Ellie whispered. Then in Portuguese, "Neo Dixa, don't leave me alone." As the officers approached, Maria dropped to one knee. "Ellie," she said in a gentle voice. "I'm right here. You are safe." Ellie's hands began to tremble. Her breathing grew shallow. No, her voice cracked. "She's mine. My words, my teacher. The woman in the gray suit leaned in. We'll be quick. Let's go. Ellie turned and bolted behind the couch. The officers moved, and Maria did something no one expected. She stepped in front of them. You don't touch her, she said, voice like iron. Ma'am, move aside. No, Maria said. She is mid-transition between linguistic states. Any shock will reverse every ounce of progress. You're not qualified. I have 17 published studies, Maria said, eyes blazing. 2 in child language and therapy. You want to undo all of it in 5 seconds for a headline? Brandon stood between them now. This is my house, my daughter. And unless there's a warrant, you're not laying a hand on her. The room turned to ice. Ellie began reciting something softly, shakily. 1 apple. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Maria knelt beside her. Keep going, Ellie. Keep going, mija. Alma Sagwa. Ellie looked up. They want to take me away from you. Maria whispered, I won't let them. The officers backed off. The woman in gray made a phone call in private. 5 minutes later, she returned, jaw tight. You have 48 hours. After that, all non-parental educational contact must cease unless cleared by a certified state-recognized institution. Then they left. That night, Brandon stood alone in his study, staring at a photo on the bookshelf. His late wife, Anna, holding baby Ellie by the ocean, both of them laughing at the wind. She had believed in silence, in rest, in the kind of love that didn't always shout. Now he saw it in Maria, in Ellie, in languages he didn't even speak. Maria sat on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, listening to the soft hum of Ellie singing to herself in 4 languages through the baby monitor she kept clipped to her belt. Brandon stepped outside with 2 mugs. Chamomile, he said. My mother used to swear by it when things felt unfixable. Maria accepted it quietly. They'll come again, she said. They'll make it worse. I know, Brandon looked out toward the trees. Then we make it undeniable, her progress, her voice, her truth. Maria turned to him. And if they take her anyway? He looked her in the eye. Then they'll have to answer to every parent who ever lost faith in the system and to a little girl who learned to speak because one woman refused to stay silent. The living room had never looked like this before. The baby grand piano was pushed into the corner. The Persian rug rolled up and stored away. In its place stood a single camera on a tripod, its lens trained toward a child-sized reading chair centered under soft window light. Brandon adjusted the mic. Maria stood beside him, checking Ellie's cue cards one last time. She doesn't have to do this, Brandon said, voice low. She wants to, Maria replied just as quietly. And more importantly, she's ready. At 9 a.m., Ellie Westfield walked into the room wearing a navy blue dress and white sneakers. Her hair was combed neatly to the side, her posture straight, her hands clutching a small dog-eared book titled My Words Matter. She climbed into the chair and waited. The red recording light blinked on. Maria gave her a gentle nod from behind the camera. Begin whenever you're ready, mija. Ellie took a breath, then another, and then, hello, my name is Ellie Westfield. I'm 6 years old. For a long time, people thought I couldn't speak, but that wasn't true. I just didn't know how to say things that made sense, not in English, not in noise. But Maria spoke in the quiet, and I heard her. She turned a page. Now I want you to hear me. Ellie began reading from her book. Each page had one sentence. Each sentence a different language. My name is Ellie, Ellie, Ellie. Her voice never wavered. At the end, she looked into the camera and said, I am not broken. I just needed someone to listen. Brandon stood frozen behind the camera. His daughter, his silent, unreachable daughter, had just spoken to the world. The video went live at 2:17 p.m. Brandon posted it himself. No press release, no PR firm, no board approval, just a caption. This is my daughter. This is her voice. This is why we fight. Within 2 hours, it had 100,000 views. By midnight, over 4 million. The next morning, Good Morning America called. By afternoon, a producer from 60 Minutes emailed. A Harvard developmental psychologist left a voicemail offering to co-publish Maria's work. Anonymous donations began pouring into a fund labeled Ellie's Voice Project. And then the state commission called a different tone this time. We'd like to review the footage. We may need to reassess. Brandon said he'd send it when they issued a formal apology. But the real moment came that night. After the buzz died down, after the interviews were scheduled and the statements drafted, Ellie was curled up on the couch in her favorite hoodie, nestled between Brandon and Maria. Her head rested on Maria's shoulder, her fingers absently tracing letters on Brandon's forearm. Papa, she whispered. Brandon looked down. Yeah, sweetheart? Can we do the song again? The one from the book? Maria smiled. Which one? The one in all the words? Brandon laughed softly. I don't know all the words. Ellie sat up. I'll teach you. And she did, a line at a time, in Portuguese, in Arabic, in German, in English. Her voice drifted through the room like a prayer and a promise. Hours later, when the house had gone still, Maria opened her laptop. She stared at the blinking cursor on a Word document titled Chapter 1, The Girl Who Whispered in 7 Languages. She began to type, This is not a story about autism. This is not a story about a maid or a millionaire or controversy. This is a story about a girl who was never broken and the woman who refused to let the world silence her. She saved the file, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was writing from the basement. She was writing from the center of the world, from BUP stories. They called her the Miracle Child. By the second week, Ellie Westfield's video had crossed 12 million views. Major networks scrambled for airtime. Educators and parents flooded forums, sharing stories of children like Ellie, children mislabeled, misunderstood, silenced. But in the echo of applause, something else stirred, something colder, something sharper. Not everyone liked the woman behind the camera. It started subtly. A parenting columnist wrote a piece titled, Should Unlicensed Individuals Be Leading the Neurodivergent Education Movement? She never mentioned Maria by name. She didn't have to. Then came the interview clip, an edited segment from Maria's university lecture 5 years ago, taken out of context and captioned, Language is political. Control how a child speaks, and you control how they are heard. The online vitriol followed. She's dangerous. She's manipulating children's identities. Just a housekeeper playing scientist. At first, Brandon tried to ignore it until Ellie came home from a scheduled visit with a learning group at a private prep academy and asked, "Why did a lady say Miss Maria shouldn't teach anyone?" Maria was quiet. Brandon wasn't. He walked into the study that night, slammed the laptop shut, and said, "We're going to fix this." Maria looked up. Fix what? The internet? The fear? No, Brandon said. The lie. You're not just a woman behind the camera. You're the woman who gave my daughter her life back. She met his gaze. And that makes people uncomfortable. He hesitated. I want you to go public. Maria blinked. What? Speak. Share your side. Your story. Ellie doesn't need to be the only voice. Maria looked away, voice low. I've been silenced by rooms like that before. Brandon stepped forward. Then let's change the room. A week later, Maria stood backstage at the Connecticut Education Summit, wearing a charcoal blazer and flats that didn't quite fit. Her palms were damp, her heart pounded with the rhythm of every door that had ever been shut in her face. But then she saw Ellie sitting in the front row, legs swinging under her chair, mouthing the words, "You got this." And she walked to the podium. The audience was restless at first, mostly school administrators, policy consultants, a few tight-lipped officials from the Family Oversight Commission. But as Maria spoke, the room shifted. She didn't speak like an academic. She spoke like someone who had seen a child choose silence because the world refused to listen. She shared Ellie's progress, the multilingual triggers, the structured play, the moments of heartbreak, the first word in Korean, the whisper in Portuguese, and then she paused. My name is Dr. Maria Delgado, she said. And for over a year, I scrubbed the floors of a home where I was overqualified, overlooked, and underestimated, not because I lacked value, but because the world often measures worth by titles, not by truth. She looked down at Ellie. And that little girl, she taught me that sometimes the only degree that matters is how much you're willing to believe in someone no one else will. The room erupted, not in polite applause, in tears, in standing ovation, in truth. That night, Maria sat on the back porch of the Westfield estate, barefoot, sipping tea while Ellie lay across her lap, fast asleep. Brandon leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching them. You changed the conversation today, he said. Maria shook her head. She did. No, Brandon said, stepping into the light. You gave her the words. Maria looked at him, eyes tired but warm. You know what the hardest part was? What? Letting myself be seen. Brandon didn't reply. He just sat beside her in silence as the stars blinked awake above them from BUP stories. In another part of the country, a woman sat in her office, scrolling through a transcript of Maria's speech. On the screen beside her were photos, Maria teaching Ellie smiling mid-sentence, the clip from the summit. Then the woman made a call. Harvard wants her, she said into the phone. Tenure track, public fellowship. Get it done before Stanford does. And upstairs, in a room still full of crayons and learning cards, Ellie taped a new word to her wall, familia. And beneath it, she added in marker, where your voice is safe. It arrived in a deep blue envelope, gold lettering across the front. Office of Faculty Appointments, Harvard Graduate School of Education. Brandon found it on the porch swing just after dawn, where Maria always left her teacup. He turned it over in his hands, the weight of it undeniable. Inside, the letter was crisp, formal, glowing. We are honored to offer Dr. Maria Delgado a tenure position in applied linguistics with full research support and a public fellowship for neurodivergent educational innovation. It was everything she'd once dreamed of, everything she'd buried in silence. That evening, Maria stood in the kitchen with the unopened envelope still in her hand. She hadn't told Ellie yet. Brandon watched her from the hallway. "You should go," he said quietly. She didn't turn. "Should I?" He stepped closer. "You earned this. You fought for it long before I knew your name, before Ellie ever whispered her first word to you." Maria exhaled slowly. "I promised her I'd stay. And now she's strong enough to understand what it means if you don't," Brandon said. "You didn't promise to never grow. You promised to never give up on her voice." That night, Maria sat on the edge of Ellie's bed, smoothing the girl's hair back as she drifted into sleep. "Miss Maria," Ellie murmured. "Yes, mija? Are you leaving?" Maria paused. Ellie opened her eyes, searching her face. "I heard you on the phone. The big school, the one with the red buildings." Maria's heart clenched. "I haven't decided." "I think you should," Ellie whispered. Maria blinked. "You do?" "You gave me my words," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "Now you have to give them to other kids like me, before someone else tells them to stay quiet." A tear slid down Maria's cheek. "I'm scared," she admitted. Ellie reached up and cupped her cheek. "So was I." The next morning, Maria walked into Brandon's study and placed the letter on his desk, signed. He didn't speak, just looked up at her with a mix of pride and grief in his eyes. "I'll leave in a month," she said. "And I'll come back every other week to continue working with Ellie, off the record, as family." Brandon stood and held out his hand, but Maria shook her head and hugged him instead. No words, just gratitude. In the weeks that followed, Ellie began recording videos for Maria's new digital classroom, short clips where she greeted kids in multiple languages, read short stories, and shared the signs she once used when words didn't come easily. The channel grew faster than anyone expected. Learning with Ellie became a movement, a safe space, a revolution in whispers. 2 days before Maria's departure, Brandon took Ellie on a walk through the old town square, just the two of them. They stopped at a mural freshly painted by local high schoolers. In the center was a child, hands outstretched. Floating around her were words in every language imaginable. And at her side stood a woman, arms open, not instructing, but listening. Ellie pointed. "That's me." Brandon nodded. "And her?" Ellie smiled. "That's Miss Maria, but also kind of Mom." That night, Maria packed quietly books, notebooks, the dog-eared copy of My Words Matter Ellie had gifted her. As she zipped the suitcase shut, Ellie stood in the doorway holding a new drawing. It was the two of them sitting under a tree, reading side by side. Above them were the words, "Some people teach with rules. You taught with love." Maria knelt. "You're going to change the world, Ellie." Ellie smiled. "So are you, just from a different place." As Maria's car pulled away the next morning, Ellie ran beside it, waving wildly, her voice carrying above the wind. Ciao. Aid logo. See you soon. Maria rolled down the window, one last look, one last promise. Never stop speaking, mija. Ellie didn't. She never would from BUP stories. The ballroom lights dimmed. Over 2,000 educators, doctors, and parents from around the world leaned forward in silence as the moderator stepped up to the podium at the Global Conference on Inclusive Education in Geneva. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, our next speaker is not only the youngest presenter in this conference's history, but also the living proof that when we listen, truly listen, miracles aren't rare, they're inevitable. He paused. She once couldn't speak at all. Today, she speaks in 9 languages. A wave of murmurs spread across the room. Please welcome Miss Ellie Westfield. Ellie, now 8 years old, stepped onto the stage in a powder blue dress, her hair braided to the side. She walked with confidence but not pride. At the edge of the stage stood Maria Delgado, now a tenure professor, author, and global advocate, hands clasped, eyes glistening. Ellie reached the podium, adjusted the mic, and waited. She didn't rush. She let the silence settle. Then she spoke. Hello, I'm Ellie. 2 years ago, I had a voice, but no one could hear it, not because I was broken, but because no one had the key. She glanced to the side of the stage. Maria nodded. Ellie continued, her voice steady, her cadence deliberate. Miss Maria didn't fix me. She didn't rescue me. She saw me. She waited. She listened in the language I spoke before I could even say it. She looked around the room and then, with calm precision, Ellie said the same paragraph again in French, then Spanish, then Korean, then Arabic, then American Sign Language, then Portuguese, then Japanese. Every time, the crowd held its breath. By the end, the ballroom had forgotten to clap. They were too busy wiping their eyes. When Ellie finished, she stepped back from the mic and turned to Maria. Without a word, she held out her hand. Maria walked up, took it, and together they stood under the soft lights, teacher and student, woman and girl, proof and possibility. The standing ovation was thunderous. But Ellie didn't flinch. She turned once more to the crowd. If you want to help kids like me, she said, her voice clear, don't ask them to shout. Whisper with them and wait. Later that night, in a quiet hallway of the conference center, Brandon sat on a bench, watching his daughter from afar, Ellie laughing with 2 young children from Brazil, switching between languages effortlessly. A reporter approached him. Mr. Westfield, she asked, what do you think when you see her like this? Brandon smiled, eyes damp. I see my daughter. He paused. And the woman who reminded the world that dignity doesn't come from a diagnosis. It comes from being seen. Maria stood by the window, watching Ellie from a distance. A soft voice beside her said, Professor Delgado, when did you know she was special? She turned. A young teacher, wide-eyed, stood behind her. Maria smiled gently. The first time she didn't speak, because silence is its own kind of language. You just have to care enough to translate. 2 years later, the Ellie and Maria Foundation had helped over 50,000 children across 6 continents. The phrase "let them whisper" became a global movement in education. And somewhere on a chalkboard in a small school in Ohio, a child who hadn't spoken in 4 years traced her first written word with trembling hands. It was one she'd heard in a video from a girl who once whispered alone, "Familia." If this story of overcoming adversity and recognition touched your heart, subscribe to BUP Stories for more stories that remind us that a person's true value can never be measured by the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the work they do, but by the difference they make in the lives of others.